Major breaking news. Huge news out of Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration. Guess what? They've just announced a major shift in so-called gun policy for the District of Columbia, and it is hugely favorable to the Second Amendment, reaffirming what I've been saying even before the 2024 election, which is the presidency of Donald J. Trump. And yes, the Attorney General Pam Bondi is the best ever Second Amendment administration in history, period, full stop. More proof is coming on the way when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. Fantastic news in favor of our Second Amendment and further proof that the Donald Trump administration, with Attorney General Pam Bondi and her Second Amendment task force, continues to do fantastic work to advance our Second Amendment rights bit by bit, inch by inch. Just now, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, formerly of Fox News, happy to report, has just announced that her office, which is responsible for prosecuting, among other things, various crimes in Washington, D.C., has just announced, believe it or not, this is not satire, it's not AI, it's truth. Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, has just announced her office, the DOJ, will not be pursuing gun charges over the mere carrying of rifles and carrying of shotguns within the District of Columbia. This is a huge deal, folks, because this policy change is not something that was just done willy-nilly. It literally was done because, according to a report from the Washington Post, this law of D.C. that said the carrying of rifles and shotguns, this blanket prohibition, violated the Second Amendment. Specifically, here is what the Washington Post is reporting that Jeanine Pirro had to say about the decision to no longer pursue gun charges over the mere carrying of rifles and shotguns in the District of Columbia. In a statement to the Washington Post, Jeanine Pirro said Tuesday night that D.C.'s blanket prohibition on carrying shotguns or rifles is clearly a violation of the Supreme Court's holdings in two landmark cases expanding the right to keep and bear arms, the District of Columbia versus Heller from 2008 and Nysurper versus Bruin from 2022. That is fantastic, but it gets even better, folks. Even though I'm really happy to see the decision by this U.S. Attorney's Office to not prosecute the mere carrying of rifles and shotguns under this D.C. law, it gets even better, folks. Because where did this policy arise from? And who supports it? John Sauer, the Solicitor General of the United States. You may recall, for you longtime fans of the Four Box Diner, I said very early on in 2025, in the early part of the Trump administration, where people were saying, what's going on with the Second Amendment? I said, look, we need the United States Senate to confirm two people. Harmeet Dillon, in charge of civil rights at the Department of Justice, and John Sauer to be the Solicitor General of the United States, who advocates, among other things, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of the federal government. I said we needed Harmeet Dillon and John Sauer to be confirmed by the United States Senate before we can go full-blown on the offense to advance our right to keep and bear arms. And when that occurred, we now see the results. Because here's John Sauer, the Solicitor General of the United States, responsible for identifying and taking positions before the United States Supreme Court on all sorts of issues, including the Second Amendment, advocating for this particular position. Here's what the Washington Post has to say about the Solicitor General and this policy. Regarding the new policy, Jeanine Pirro added, quote, "Nothing in this memo from the Department of Justice and the Office of the Solicitor General precludes the United States Attorney's Office from charging a felon with the possession of a firearm, which includes a rifle, shotgun, and attendant large capacity magazine, pursuant to DC Code 22-4503. What it does preclude is a separate charge of possession of a registered rifle or shotgun. Exactly right. What they're saying, which is okay, is that if you're a gangbanger who has previously been convicted of gangbanging, violent robberies, burglaries, rape, murder, all the usual stuff that the gangbangers of Washington, D.C. do, that the violent thugs in D.C. do, and you've been convicted of one of those felonies, and you're prohibited from carrying a firearm or touching a firearm under federal gun control law 18 U.S.C. 922G1, and you did something that was dangerous, which these guys basically this is what they've all done. I don't think these guys on the gangbangers on the streets of D.C. are like, illegally stock trading or anything like that. If they're a convicted felon in D.C., I'm guessing 99.9% of the time they've done something violent, something dangerous. And that means 18 U.S.C. 922G1, which is the prohibited person statute of the federal law that prohibits person convicted of a felony from possessing firearms, that will apply. And that's exactly what Jeanine Pirro says, that having consulted with the Solicitor General of the United States and the Department of Justice generally, which would include Attorney General Pam Bondi, obviously, they've concluded that if you're a violent felon and you get caught with a gun, guess what? We're going to prosecute you. But if you're not, and you're caught with a gun, well, at least when it comes to rifles and shotguns, apparently, according to this reporting by the Washington Post, they're not going to charge. They're not going to seek felony charges. According to the Washington Post, federal prosecutors in Washington, D.C. have been instructed not to seek felony charges against people who are carrying rifles or shotguns in the nation's capital. Doesn't matter. That is exactly what the U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro has said, and that is what the Washington Post is reporting. And that is consistent with the right to carry guns under Bruin that says you have a right to carry arms in public in anticipation of potential self-defense scenarios. Now, the only two things you should be aware of, which I think is very helpful and interesting, is there was a press conference hosted by Jeanine Pirro where one of the DC, beat reporters for the mainstream media was trying to put pressure on her for cutting funding for so-called gun violence prevention programs, which, in my experience and my opinion, is that most of this money spent is just giving money to like left-wing social workers, left-wing lawyers, and left-wing activists to do nutty anti-gun things. And they should all be cut off from all taxpayer funding as far as I'm concerned. We should not be funding the demise of our constitutional rights, including, of course, our right to keep and bear arms. So when Jeanine Pirro was harassed by a reporter about this, her response was, "Oh, stop it. We are putting all kinds of resources onto the street." So she basically poo-pooed the notion that the Trump administration was not doing anything to prevent violence in all of its forms, including but not limited to people who misuse firearms, which is what we want. Because again, from the Second Amendment perspective, we do not want psychopaths, terrorists, cartel members, and other wackadoodles out there with guns misusing guns. We don't want that for many reasons, including number one, we don't want people getting hurt, period, by violent, psychopathic, wackadoodle thugs. That's not good for society, period, full stop. But beyond that, the ripple effect when these nut job wackadoodle psychos go out there and misuse guns is that it urges and causes a stir and encouragement, if you will, and gives sort of food to the anti-gun movement to argue that there needs to be more gun control law because they keep pointing to these misuses of firearms, which has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. So we do want gangbangers put in prison and locked up with a key thrown away because they are the cause of gun control, because the anti-gunners get to point to the crimes committed by these nut job gangbangers, and that's bad for the Second Amendment, in addition to being bad for society at large. And of course, if you're truly a mental psychopathic person, you really need to be in a mental institution because, as we've talked about before on this channel, if you're too crazy to be on the street with a gun, then odds are you're too crazy to be on the street, period. And that's why we should have more mental institutions, which is something that President Donald Trump is trying to bring back. So these people are not sleeping on the streets of our big cities as homeless people, which is not good for them, and it's not good for society at large. Beyond that, it's also worth noting that when it comes to the DC Police Department, we know for a fact that thanks to the pressure placed upon the DC Police Department is expediting and moving much faster with interviews and the licensing process when it comes to the issuance of concealed carry permits. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a lot better today than it was before President Trump took over and Pam Bondi became the Attorney General and before Harmeet Dillon became the head of the Civil Rights Division at the United States Department of Justice. So anyway, all in all, this is exciting news to see further proof that this administration of President Donald J. Trump and Pam Bondi is the best ever presidential administration when it comes to enforcing and respecting and restoring our Second Amendment rights. That is what I said before the election. This is what I predicted, and it is proving true. No other president has had to deal with the multi-billion-dollar anti-gun movements like President Trump has, and he is doing a fantastic job advancing the ball. Of course, nothing is perfect. Everything takes time, but the trend is clearly our friend, and the fact that John Sauer, the Solicitor General, is on board with this interpretation of the Second Amendment that protects long guns like rifles and shotguns, in addition to, of course, the position taken by the Department of Justice in the Fifth Circuit in the Peterson case dealing with whether or not suppressors are protected arms under the Second Amendment, and the positions they took in the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit out of Chicago in the Barnett case dealing with AR-15 magazine bans and the like out of Illinois. All of these trends are our friend when it comes to restoring and protecting our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And this new policy by former Fox News host and United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, is further proof that the Second Amendment is top of the mind of our current White House, which is fantastic. So there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxandIron. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble. And I look forward to talking to you again real soon here, the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.